Hello my dear viewers, welcome to a new episode. Are you crazy, obotomy? When we want to positively describe a creative and innovative person, we say he's insane. But this label can also be used in a negative way. For example, to describe the pressuring life rhythm we live in now that makes us go through daily struggles on the streets, during commute, or even with our friends and family. But we can say that what happens in the streets and with the public is an insanity that we can handle, because we can predict their reactions and adapt to it. Or to be more accurate, we can be a part of this insanity too. Are you okay, obotomy? Just turn a blind eye. But if suddenly amid our normal life with its normal insanity, a mentally ill person appeared who screams, curses, or talks to himself, the first thing we feel is fear and wanting to stay away from him, or that he stays away from us, because we can't expect his reactions. Because for us, all his actions aren't based on logic, there's nothing happening that's met with a reasonable, suitable reactions. That's an insanity we're not a part of. The fear that we feel towards us not understanding these insane events or our expectations for the mentally ill's actions, let me tell you, that this fear isn't new and it might actually be a reasonable fear in our world, and as old as humanity. Humanity fought for a long time this thing's called insanity. When we take a look at the 15th century in Europe, known as the Renaissance and also the Age of Reason, the German author Sebastian Brandt portrayed an epic called Ship of Fools. It's like a foul cart in Zamalek. This ship carried fools and mad people, or the outcasts who didn't adapt to their societies, to take these marginalized people to a land far from a society that banished them. An imagery that inspired painters like Hieronymus Bosch with a painting carrying the same title. But let me tell you, that this wasn't just a literary metaphor. What I'm telling you now was a policy in Europe to banish madmen out of cities, whether by leaving them wander and lost in the forests or wilderness, or by shipping them on ships. In Frankfurt in the late 14th century, some sailor men were tasked to empty their cities from madmen. You sailor, you're responsible for getting rid of every madman in the city. Sometimes these sailors threw the madmen in the sea before reaching a new city. We won't take them to a far city, we'll just get rid of them. In not so ancient history, like the Middle Ages or old civilizations, like the ancient Egyptian civilization, Babylon, Greek, and Persia, even the prehistoric man, my friend, these all looked at insanity as a god's punishment or an evil spirit or a weak personality resulted from wrong moral choices. There was no mental illness, it was that the person was insane because he was bad and immoral. You did bad deeds, that's why you're insane. Their idea was that insanity happens for demonic reasons. In 1997, archaeologists in South Russia found skulls drilled with stone tools. How old were they? obotomy? Minus 5,000 years BC. Anyway, scientists concluded that these holes in the skulls were attempts to cure insanity through opening the skull to leave space for these demons to leave. A practice that killed a huge amount of people. These primitive practices remained ongoing until the 18th century. For thousands of years, madmen suffered from hunger, slavery, and exile. According to the philosopher Michel Foucault in his book, A History of Insanity in the Age of Reason, by the way, if you ever got a hold on my WhatsApp profile you'll find my picture with this book. I might seem weird but I probably am. Or trying to be. This book is extremely important. It was published in 1961, and it asked questions that shook psychology. Foucault asked questions like, who is mad? And what determines it? And with what authority? He saw that writing an accurate narrative of the history of madness wouldn't be about insanity and its treatment. There's an important note, insanity wasn't made up on its own, but was made up around topics like authority, freedom, the mind history, and exiling the ones different from the society based on the mind. For the mind here to become, or what we call, mind, is now the judge. It determines what's sane and what's not. Why not use another organ? Liver for example, does someone consult it? It's not involved. They say, the mind and the heart. And the mind decides who's right, really. It would definitely choose itself. I think the organs need to rebel on that mind organ. Have you thought about what you're saying? My friend, if I did, I wouldn't have said it, it would stop me. Foucault said that in the Enlightenment age in Europe there was a connection between insanity, immorality, and crime. And that the hospitals that were supposed to admit madmen weren't intended to cure them as much as to morally punish them. Man at that time wanted to reassure himself that, I'm a good man. These are madmen because they did bad things. Man here wanted to have control over all kinds of rebellion over rules and values. As much as Foucault's view was criticized by intellectuals and authors, his questions remained essential and important when studying insanity. His view also contributed in a huge movement in the 60s in books, films, processions, and campaigns to change mental health care. It was an important book, my friend, and Michel Foucault was one of the pioneers of sociology and philosophy. Having a branch of medicine focusing on mental illness is a new concept, a modern concept that's no more than 150 years old. The first modern view that we probably looked at insanity by was on the hands of the Greek, and it showed in tragic plays like Oedipus by Sophocles. The idea of self or the internal soul tormented by its desires and ambitions or even feeling shame, remorse or guilt. The famous Greek doctor Hippocrates and his students, they believed that the medical explanation for insanity goes back to the four temperaments. What are those? Obotomy. You really want to know? Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. EU. The balance of these four leads to the body and mind being well, and their imbalance can lead to insanity. So if I have bronchitis, I should go to a psychiatrist, obotomy? I want to tell you that we need psychiatrists no matter what we have. Despite the naivety of the four temperaments theory, it was the first time we see mental illness as a medical condition, one that's resulted from an organic reason, not demons or supernatural power. The Greek philosophy described insanity as a soul's sickness that yes, it can happen due to pressures or worries, but they didn't deny the role of medicine to cure the body of it. The richness of theoretical thinking of Greek and Romans had them create a very rich references to cure insanity in a fleet of medical methods and medicines based on the four temperaments balance. That's the part that cured medically. Psychiatry then appeared to fulfill the basic mental needs for the patient like self-expression, and trying to relieve some of the thoughts controlling him and that overthinking he did. There's playing music for the patient, sending him on trips and showing landscapes and also making him watch plays which, as Aristotle believed, cleansed the audience. I also feel the people watching Masra Masr to be cleansed. Looking at insanity as a treatable medical condition started to take steps back by the emergence of Christianity in the 1st century. Once it appeared, there was sayings that medical aspects weren't always applicable. So the general aura at that time would be that the reason behind insanity or evil spirits and demons and expelling these evil spirits had to be crucial during baptism. It stayed this way till the 11th century. Because of the Islamic civilization's role in preserving Greek and Roman findings through translation. That's although old Arabs believed that insanity was from jinn, but they were the reason why we preserved the Greek medical heritage about insanity. Ibn Sina wrote the book, The Canon of Medicine, in 1025, where he designated 3 chapters to discuss mental conditions and their reasons. Then Abu Bakr al-Razi appeared and diagnosed depression and looked for treatment. Here an idea appears of having a specialized section in the hospital to treat mental illnesses during the age of al-Walid ibn Abd al-Malik. The Arab medicine cared about treating insanity in different ways, listening to music, personal hygiene, or watching landscapes in the gardens of the hospitals. Note that we're talking about 1025, see how hospitals were like. Greenery and music, as if you're enjoying a spa. At that time, being admitted to the hospital meant you were a hopeless case, even if this hospital was advanced comparing to the hospitals elsewhere, that's as if there were any. That was a great advancement, but the first hospital to treat mental illnesses was during Sultan Qalawun's age. Looks like he was a little sultwide. That was in 792. Where? In Cairo. Wow. Obotomy. Cairo was interested in mental illnesses? This hospital was called Bamaristan, that was derived into the name we call that hospital now, Maristan. That was happening in the Islamic world. While Christian Europe during the Middle Ages, after years of, we won't do anything, we don't want to understand anything, we know everything, interest was restored in studying insanity. Through what? Translating the writings of Arab and Muslim authors who also translated some from Greeks and Romans. Just to know that civilization build each other. There's no such thing as each for his own. And hear this out. Among the books translated was Ibn Sina's book in Latin that became second most printed book after the Bible. Wow. Philosophers in Europe, with St. Thomas Aquinas on top, continued to study insanity by regarding it as a soul's illness. The idea of insanity being an organic treatable illness was instilled more, but also the idea of demonic possession remained the dominant one. So yes, it's an organic treatable illness, but we still need to get rid of the demon inside causing the insanity. This idea reached its vortex in the 17th century, when the English author Robert Burton, in his book, The Anatomy of Melancholy, declared that the devil was the main culprit behind depression and suicide. Breaking news, the devil is the main culprit behind depression and suicide. That's all, Burton? Yes. The study of demonology then flourished, coning the relation between demons and insanity, that manifested in the witch-hunting campaigns, that led to 40 to 60,000 women victims that were accused of being witches and practicing witchcraft. In one of the stories told, when someone says, "People, this woman is a witch and does evil witchcraft. They took her and drowned her. If she floated, then she was a witch who used evil powers, so they burn and kill her. What if she drowned, abo-mead? Sorry, ops. What? May she rest in peace, we had our doubts. They were strange times, 40 to 60,000 women died aimlessly. We tried to drown them, so they drowned. Not just the ones said to be witches, other than them, many madmen and depressed people would also be burnt." According to some church fathers then, melancholy was the devil's favorite timing. The devil didn't have our normal seasons with summer and winter. Once he saw melancholy, he jumped in his swimsuit. According to inquisitions, these were the easiest preys for the devil. For a long time, insanity was used as an accusation to disfigure political and religious opponents. If I wanted to get rid of someone, I would say he were insane, as the ones not in line with us had no brains. Because we think with logic, and all our decisions are logical. So the ones not following us aren't logical, so they're not sane, hence insane. In the end of the Middle Ages, the leprosy patients and the poor were locked in with the madmen in monasteries, then to wards and specialized institutes to care for them. During the Renaissance age, between 14th and 17th centuries, when the writers, artists, and scientists revived the old knowledge to revive Europe, they also revived the relation between insanity, old knowledge, and wisdom, and looked to the madman as a saint. They saw that one wouldn't understand man without understanding his sanity and insanity. What are the Renaissance scientists saying? Abo-mead. How can sanity and insanity stand together? They're opposites. They said combining between reality, delirium, dreams, and hallucinations to understand the human condition better. This idea creates new interpretations for insanity that we use sometimes when we describe creative people now, that ties insanity to creativity. It's like when a player is creative, so a Sam Chowell goes insane over it. How did he see him? Respect our minds, Salem. Anyway, this relation was reflected in literary works like Shakespeare's plays where his characters go insane, like King Lear who reached his true self through insanity. Insanity here is glasses to see better. Cervantes' Don Quixote was the first modern novel that had its hero as an insane man who fought windmills. The character of the fool, insane, and idiot in literary works to become a criticism for the human experience. How long will we criticize the human experience? It's bad for it's healthy, enough. My friend, focus. This criticism was a tool to remind man of his truth through a non-logical language that posed narratives and questions about love, reality, and death. But with the Age of Enlightenment, the way of dealing with madmen changed from worshipping or exiling, to locking up and submission. In 1656, the first royal decree to build the first public hospital in Paris was set to lock up madmen with the poor, beggars, and the unemployed to have them disappear. How evil! In an age where the mind was in control, the insane had no place. That's besides the countryside migration to the city. Once the people left the countryside and followed the city lights, a state of panic emerged due to overflow of workforce and employees. In the old days, everybody farmed so everybody ate. There wasn't unemployment, but once there was factories that limited numbers to hire, unemployment appeared, that we talked about in an episode. This created panic among the people. That's when our nice insane man appears that we've been talking about, as someone who combines between danger, poverty, and employment. Their idea of exile appears. These people can't come over, they're crazy? The most famous and worst reputation hospital of those was the Bethlehem Royal, founded in the 13th century to take care of the poor and in need. That was the primary goal. But starting 14th century, the hospital specialized in hoarding madmen from streets, and the ways of their treatment was closer to torture, to the point where the word Bethlehem was a synonym for chaos and insanity. Patients could be put in icy water for a long time or be tied with metal chains for days, or sit on a chair hanging from the ceiling and the chair kept rotating until they passed out. The dominant belief was that exposing the patient to isolation trauma, torture, and hitting, he might be cured. Foucault saw that this view on insanity at the time wasn't different from how we humans see animals. As evidence, many groups were locked in naked in one dark cell and chained, and food was given to them through a small opening. They were locked in these cells for long times, not knowing day from night in temperatures that could reach -18. By time, The Bethlehem Hospital used the madmen for profits through presenting them as entertainment shows for the bourgeois during holidays. Isn't that TikTok content? This was for tickets. People paid money to watch madmen. This shows presented madmen as animals. They were sometimes trained on performing dancing acrobat moves. We want entertainment, there's no Netflix. So come on, dance and do acrobats. The authorities in England defined people as that breaking away from the moral code was punished by insanity. If you broke the moral code, it's insanity. You'll find code errors everywhere. The idea of madmen as entertainment was also in Germany and France that had theatrical shows in places like the Sheraton where the heroes of these plays were madmen. The patients suffered from neglect, hunger, death, and living in dirty health conditions. Their will was broken by torture. One of the patients' testimonies for the investigation panel around what was happening in the Bethlehem Hospital was for a patient called James Norris. He remained chained to metal bars in the wall for 12 years. Wow, 12 years? Yes, 12. There wasn't differentiation between insanity, idiocy, or breaking social values. In the 17th century, the records of Sheraton displayed they could hold someone for insanity accusation just because he was a liar, violent, and annoying. What? The last one scared you as you're annoying. In St. Lazare Hospital, a 70-year-old priest was admitted as insane because he took usuries of high interest rates, and refused to confess that usury was a sin and took pride in usury and cheapness. So the church saw him as a threat and staining the honor of ordination. Foucault saw that this could be idiocy but not insanity. According to Foucault, the priest did something stupid not for dealing in usury, but for being a man of religion who did it. In this view, that was idiocy, but not an idiocy that deserved an insanity accusation. That it was an overestimation. In the 18th century, a lady was admitted with the madman for the awful crime of saying she didn't love her husband, and that there was no law on earth forcing her to spend her life with him. She didn't see marriage as a final destiny. Why would I stay his wife for my life? It didn't differ much in asylums in France, Russia, or the UK. At the end of the 18th century, we see emergence of the moral treatment. We don't know how to treat this man. We locked him, worshipped him, killed him, burnt him, so now we try to solve it by working on morality. This idea was established in France by Philippe Pinel, who thankfully changed treating insanity with restraining, hitting, physical harm, and saw him as worthy of pity, mercy, and patience. According to this ideology, and seeing the madman as empathy-worthy, a bunch of hospitals were made. And then, likewise, hospitals of York Retreat were established in England that always made sure there was a safe sanctuary of those madmen we're discussing. These people, in that place, would do activities, like reading, conversations, and light handwork. The insanity hospitals changed into buildings by excellent engineers. It was known for its elegance, being spacious, and nice landscapes. These asylums had few patients. That's why they were successful to fulfill their individual needs. These hospitals focused on the psychological control of doctors on patients we take from the doctor, and pressure the patient, through and note the morality treatment the doctor presents him a role model through his personality and experience. You insane person, look at the doctor and his grades. Here, we do look at the madman with a little bit of mercy. But also this madman wasn't mad out of nowhere, but mad because he committed a sin. This kind of asylums was then founded in the US. There was even great optimism that they were creating a utopia for patients by good moral treatment. But at the end of the 19th century until the first half of 21st century, someone started messing around with this optimism. Why people? It was running on wheels. Optimism decreased. With an increase of patients and failure to treat most of them, where would pessimism come from? These institutions started deteriorating and returned to being for lockups, where patients lived among neglect, filth, being tied in beds, isolation, and forbidden from taking walks. Imagine. This was the one with landscapes, and doctors as role models became a prison for patients, and treatment went back to being a punishment method. By the 20th century, this philosophy of morality treatment disappears, to be replaced by medical treatments like insulin shots that's used as early treatment for schizophrenia. Patients took them and be injected with insulin for weeks and going into coma. There was also electric shocks that are still used now. Something then appears called lobotomy, which is taking out the frontal lobe. This appeared in the 30s of 20th century by the Portuguese brain surgeon Antonio Manes, to treat schizophrenia and depression, where he received a Nobel for it in 1949. Some people rank this prize as one of the worst Nobel Prizes in history. Let me tell you that surgery was profitable at first and changed the patient's behavior from violence and hard edge into calm. But on the long term, the problem appears, because the frontal lobe is responsible for thinking, our physical and emotional ability, social communication, and attention. It's also responsible for our personality. So, the patient's condition worsened and their self-awareness disappeared. They start have deficiencies in communication, their mental skills declined, and their personalities disappear. So it was normal for people to calm down, because they disappeared. Despite the negative results of the surgery, it remained in the US till the late 70s. From the 30s till 70s, we were taking out people's brains. Despite the disadvantages of insanity hospitals in 18th and 19th century, they made doctors consider insanity in a different way. Till that time, insanity was a huge umbrella containing all mental illnesses, like psychosis, schizophrenia, bipolar, and even depression and anxiety. Even if you acted weird, you were insane. Wish studying insanity by doctors from France, Germany, and UK. They reached many theories about the concept of mental illness and watch out for things like emotional pressures and instability, or the war or political conflict on mental health. They said that these mental illnesses could be brain damage or nerve issue, biological things that are materialistic and actually be fixed. It's like the syphilis that could lead to behavioral dilemmas. Especially with modern medicine developing in 18th and 19th century and a clearer understanding for humans, we saw a development in anatomy. We start understanding many diseases and develop early forms of vaccines, and also understanding germs theories and their effects in diseases. Here the idea of mental illness caused by a biological factor returned. In 1856 in Vienna, the Austrian scientist Sigmund Freud was born, the founder of psychoanalysis. Although many of Freud's theories have been through many reviews and found to be pseudo, a lot of it were, but some things were maybe insightful, but his contributions, books, and ideas still have present effects, especially in literature, art, and cinema. Psychology owes to this man for being a separate and independent field. After Freud, people saw psychology as something to respect and try to understand. Freud changed the view on humans' brain, describing it as a smooth and dynamic. This brain gets affected by the experiences one went through, and his mental health is affected too. Freud concluded that the fears causing personality and balance disorders, this all dates back to childhood friend. Really? Obotomy? Yeah, see? And the suppressed memories that appear as hysterical symptoms, and he developed of the insanity view, that could be because of subconscious mind. He founded an entire theory called Oedipus complex. Is it really that complex, Obotomy? It was named after Sophocles' play, Oedipus. Oedipus complex and all the ideas that Freud suggested in the relation between childhood, mental illnesses, suppressed memories and desires, these were all revolutionary ideas in its time. But one of the most important contributions of this man was developing talk treatment known now as therapy. He realized that for this treatment to work there had to be a regular relation between the doctor and patient. This treatment method depends on the doctor letting the patient dive into his thoughts. Come on, patient, there's no details that are silly or shameful, say whatever you feel. Because remembering these details voluntarily could be a hard process, as this patient could have been through a bad experience or feels shameful or guilty. After Freud heard his patient's random thoughts, he started analyzing them to find out what lied beneath them. What's hidden? What's the source of the psychological issue that once understood, the patient would be treated of it? Maybe a certain childhood event caused this misery? That's what Freud looked for. After World War I in 1914, Freud applied his theory of psychological mass hysteria on thousands of soldiers. Where many soldiers suffered from shell shock that affected soldiers as a result of the horrors they saw at war. Soldiers had symptoms of daze and dissociation that manifest in paralysis and losing sight or hearing or speech. Let me tell you that the war doctors explained these symptoms as evidence of cowardice and weakness in soldiers' personalities and minds. They are weak and coward, that's why they have shell shock. That reflected on the harsh ways they tried treating soldiers with, like electric shocks and forcing the temporary mute ones to scream by putting them through immense pain. They took a mute one, hurt him badly till he screams. Of course, what we're talking about, and the doctors keep saying weakness and cowardice, is known today as post-traumatic stress disorder. These people saw war horrors, they saw people dying, they saw friend dying, they killed people. They're in shock. Freud inspired an entire generation of psychoanalysts to treat war aftermath. After that, many theoretical schools for psychoanalysis appeared, and many of them were founded in opposition with Freud's school, like his student, Carl Jung. who objected on the theory of sexual origin to the psychological disorders and offered a new perspective on personality types. He also proposed the idea of mass subconscious common between us as humans and our ancestors instead of individual subconscious. Freud's other student, the Austrian Dr. Alfred Adler, explained many of our motives with the inferiority complex as a force that pushed man to overcome it. Unlike Freud and Jung, conscious was the focus of Adler's theory, not subconscious. The man's feelings of his insecurities and attempts to fight for success. This could improve man and be a reason for being hostile with others and himself. The development of the psychoanalysis schools instills the idea that psychological illnesses aren't restricted to madmen. By the 50s of the 20th century, the idea of people suffering with psychological complexes is known and normal, and by the end of the 20th century, it became known to many people that psychological disorders like depression, anxiety, pressure, or teens adjustment disorders, addicting certain habits like alcohol or drugs, eating disorders like anorexia and bulimia, these are all things that everyone has in certain degrees. You'd find each one of us obsessed with something. In the 20th century, psychology methods and psychology were developed that thousands of years later managed to learn how to deal with the brain being an organ like any other body organ. The psychological pharmacology develops greatly since 1949 to present times. Medications that helped us overcome many mental illnesses, medication that help with anxiety, depression, OCD, schizophrenia, and psychosis. It also helped many patients to leave hospitals and live their lives. Psychology then was getting closer to medicine science. It's over people. There are no longer demons or spirits or locking up prostitutes. We'll see people as having certain biological or physical symptoms. We'll work on biological side with medicines and psychological side with therapy. Treatment forms included cognitive behavioral therapy. That depend on what neuroscience says and then compose our therapy. Despite the criticism and questions on the long-term side effects of the medicine, all what we talked about is a jump in perceiving mental illness. Since excluding the madman and not wanting to hear him, we now ask, how can we help the madman? Instead of, who's a madman? After World War II and with a great cultural change in viewing illnesses, the word insane in the US was replaced by mentally ill. There's no such thing as insane person, there's a person who has certain illness. In the English legislation, the word lunatic was replaced by mentally unstable person in 1948. Despite the development in treating mental illnesses, sociology professor of University of California, Andrew Scull, in his book, Madness in Civilization: A Cultural History of Insanity, sees that the forms of care for mental illnesses needs even after the development we reached need more advancement. Even in the countries that its people have high healthcare still doesn't fully cover mental illness. Till this day, some people still think that the mentally ill person is a sign of shame, or a sign of imbalance in personal behavior. In a report published by Safeguard Defenders in Madrid, it was written that countries like China still uses the psychiatry hospitals to imprison, oppose RS and politically active people, till now. The truth is, the way we deal with mental illness makes us understand ourselves more than understanding insanity. Maybe we are the insanity, and the insanity is us. The real tests for humanity to reach a fair society remain to be the way they treat the weaker or different people. Last but not least, don't forget to watch the old episodes and the new ones, look at the sources and subscribe if you're on YouTube. ABO Mead, since you're in the field of science and psychology, which behavioral school you align with? I was IG student and a supporter of Adler's school, but now I see humanity and say thank God we only get older. If you didn't notice, it was a pun on Mr. Adler, the one with the inferiority complex. That, as you noticed, I have a lot of those, especially in comedy. So I make up for them by comedy. Peace out.